This video gives a brief summary of MyStar's Unit 7.3 about how humans use Earth's resources to make products for specific purposes. Students will learn chemistry, earth science, and engineering concepts by exploring the life of a product from creation to disposal. We will learn about how Earth's natural resources are distributed, harvested or mined, changed into products, how those products are used, and what happens after products are used. We will also continually be looking at the impact of all this on Earth systems. This video highlights the main things to keep in mind as you work through the unit and how the unit lessons fit together. It is not intended for students. It is for you, the teacher, to get a handle on the unit and perhaps to refer back to as needed as you work through the unit with your students. If you have access to the unit materials, please use the unit overview document along with this video. The following few slides will focus on the key science and engineering aspects of the unit contents, starting with this one from the anchoring experience of Lesson 2. This slide is meant to be a little perplexing, but it serves to introduce a very useful concept called a product life cycle. Your students have probably learned about life cycles of living organisms like butterflies or frogs, but this is likely to be their first experience in thinking about the life cycle of a product. In this case, we're comparing the life cycle of a butterfly with that of a water bottle. Like most analogies, this one isn't perfect, but it is used to connect what students already know, a butterfly life cycle, to this new concept of a product life cycle. The important point here is that each of these things, the butterfly and the bottle, has a life which can be divided into stages from beginning to end as shown in these graphical representations. An important concept for teachers to understand here is that these graphical representations are examples of system models, which you will remember are one of the NGSS cross-cutting concepts. These models help us understand and test ideas in science and engineering applications. In this MyStar unit, the Lifecycle Model is used in an engineering context to help us make wise decisions about using the natural resources we have on Earth. We will use a product lifecycle model throughout this unit to tie the unit's disciplinary core ideas, DCIs, together in a meaningful way. Now let's take a look at how MyStar does this. You have probably already reviewed the content of this unit, but this is a good time to use the unit overview to review the NGSS content in this unit. You will find this content in the unit overview section called NGSS Connections, specifically in the subsection called Primary Subcomponents. These are the small pieces of content, SEPs, DCIs, and CCCs, which will be assessed in the unit. Pause the video now to go to your unit overview document and review the primary NGSS subcomponents for this as well as the supporting subcomponents. Now that we reviewed the main unit content, let's turn to how we will use a life cycle model to tie the contents together. This slide shows a graphic organizer depicting a generic product life cycle. As was stated earlier, this will be used as a model to help students understand the relationships between the parts of a system. In the upper left, we can see we have a box titled Geologic Processes and Distribution on Earth. Here is where we will look at how natural resources end up in different places on the Earth, where humans can get to them, harvest them, and eventually use them. This next box then is acquisition. So once we've located natural resources, we acquire them for our use. Most often, in fact almost every time, we do something to those natural resources in manufacturing or processing before they go on to the next box, which is the actual use. Once a product is used, it can go down a couple of pathways. It can either be recycled or composted, in which case it would go back to the start and we truly do have a cycle. If it goes into disposal or landfill, it's a little different than a cycle unless we then eventually take it out of there and reuse it somehow. This then is our life cycle model, and you will see it also has a place for outputs. Each box has this arrow pointing down here, which we're looking at impacts on Earth during each of these stages. So again, this is the model we're going to use to tie the unit contents together. So to help us understand this generic version, it'd be good to take a look at a MyStar resource explaining more about it. And to do this, we'll show you where to find this and other content background resources. To help teachers learn more about unit content, MyStar provides a simple table for each unit called Background Content Resources. The link to this document is found in the Unit Overview document, in the section just under where you found the NGSS content. One of the resources supplied in that document is a screencast video explaining the life cycle of a product and the basics of life cycle analysis. You can see that here where the red circle is. So what I'd like you to do now is use the Unit Overview document to navigate to the Teacher Background Content Resource table shown here, and then go ahead and watch this screencast video about the product life cycle. When you're done, we'll come back and we'll take a look at the Unit 7.3 Unit Challenge. Now that we know more about product life cycles, life cycle analysis, and what's in this unit, let's take a look at the MyStar Unit 7.3 Unit Challenge. In a nutshell, student teams are challenged to learn more about a particular type of building insulation material and then compare various types in order to choose the best insulation material for a community building project. This choice will be based upon the science and engineering content in this unit and will rely heavily on the completion of the life cycle model. You've probably already seen that the unit challenge scenario is found in the Unit Overview document, and it's also presented here on this slide. Note that the bold words are those which are likely to be unfamiliar to middle school students. This is okay because they will be returning to these ideas in the lessons, usually several times. Now we will use the Life Cycle Model graphic organizer, shown here, as well as this table, to go through each lesson in the unit. You probably already know that a MyStar lesson is not equal to one day of instruction. A MyStar lesson is a learning cycle that, except in rare instances, is designed to be completed over several days. We mention this to point out that this table is a rough guide as to the contents of each lesson, but nonetheless it gives us an initial look at how the unit progresses through the content as well as how the content connects to the unit challenge of the life cycle model. Lesson 1 elicits students' thoughts about the materials that go into building our homes and why these materials are different depending on where in the world the home is, as well as during different times in history. Students are also introduced to the unit challenge about selecting insulation for community building. Lesson 2 is where students are first introduced to the idea of a product's life cycle. We also ask students to consider their ideas on the life cycle of materials that go into the construction of homes and other buildings. So in the first two lessons, students are considering the overall life cycle model. Lesson 3 is when we start to dig into the DCI content of the unit. Students look into how Earth's geologic processes have distributed natural resources, such as trees, copper, and other minerals, unevenly around the globe. This is when we start to get into some detail in our life cycle model, looking more closely at the geologic distribution stage. So that's up here in the left-hand corner of the graphic organizer. Students also consider what natural resources are needed to make the various insulation materials from the unit challenge, So fiberglass, rock wool, polystyrene, and cellulose. Lesson 4 concentrates on how growing human populations affect the supply and distribution of natural resources. Students engage in activities to experience dealing with limited resources and/or access to resources. This lesson deals with the acquisition stage of the life cycle model. In Lesson 5, students examine the properties of various materials and how we exploit these properties to make useful things. Structure and function is one of the cross-cutting concepts that is brought to bear in this lesson. Students think about properties which are common to different kinds of insulation materials and what function these properties might serve. For example, students may notice that all the insulation materials are lightweight and are kind of fluffy or puffy, and then think about why this might be. Going back to our life cycle model, we want you to see that this lesson has to do with both the acquisition and manufacturing stages, and we hope your students will recognize this. Lesson 6 is about how humans synthesize natural resources into useful products and the role of science, engineering, and technology in this process. Students dig into how all sorts of things are manufactured or synthesized, and in the connect phase of the lesson into how their assigned insulation material is made. The lesson is mostly about the manufacturing stage of the life cycle, but also starts to get into the use stage. And once again, we hope your students are able to identify these stages. Lesson 7 engages students in modeling the particle nature of matter and thermal energy. If you've completed NGSX professional development, you will see how the air puppies from that experience are applied to this MyStar lesson. This lesson is focused in the use stage of the life cycle model, and students wrestle with ideas of how insulation materials work to minimize the transfer of thermal energy from one place to another. Lesson 8 steps back from the details of the life cycle model to look more big picture at the effects of each stage on Earth's systems and how negative effects can be minimized. Special attention is paid to the disposal and reuse stages. The unit challenge connection in this lesson is really challenging as it asks students to consider how the entire life cycle for their insulation material might play into a decision about selecting the one best material. As in all MyStar units, the closing lesson, Lesson 9 in this case, has students reflecting on and presenting what they've learned in the unit as well as applying that knowledge to the unit challenge. You have freedom here to decide the best way for students, usually student teams of 3 or 4, to do this. But the lessons provide guidance. For this unit, we suggest student teams each present their data about their assigned insulation material to the rest of the class, so that in the end, the whole class is educated about all 4 materials. Then, taking this information and our life cycle model into account, the whole class decides upon the best material. The summation of this exercise may be that the class then conveys their solution to the mayor or town council, explaining what insulation material is being recommended and why. So that's an overview of this MyStar unit and the life cycle model, which serves as its backbone along with the unit challenge. Thank you for watching this overview of MyStar Unit 7.3. We wish you the best as you and your students bring this unit to life in your classroom.